no. So, okay, we've been there. We've checked that out. It hasn't actually done that much for us, other than to make us, dissatisfied and discontented and lazy and frankly, more ignorant than our grandparents were. And maybe it's time to try something different. And that's where magic comes in, because magic, again, the art and science of changing consciousness in accordance with will. Maybe it's time to start changing our consciousness instead of trying to make the world obey our whims.
That reminds me of something I heard today in a sermon. Actually, I was assisting in a confirmation ceremony, and Bishop had a great quote. And I think this is true for a lot of different experiences or dynamics in faith, is that the great difference in how people of faith look at the world is, instead of seeing is believing, it's believing is seeing. It changes how you see things. And I think very much about what you're talking about there.
The world's faith tradition still remember that the attitude that we bring to the world shapes how we experience the world. And we never just experience the world directly. Though it's filtered through our beliefs, it's filtered through our worldviews, it's filtered through our state of consciousness.
Okay. You wrote in your book, Monsters, An Investigator's Guide to Magical Beings.
My most popular and least understood book. I don't think anybody gets that one.
Really? Because I thought it was really fun. What don't they get about it?
This book. That much of what's in there is actually satire.
Oh. I didn't get that either.
Yeah, what's basically the first quarter of the book, when I discuss where the scientific worldview falls down, that's the deadly serious part.
Right.
What I demonstrate thereafter is you can come up with another set of explanations for the same set of phenomena that actually make more sense than the scientific ones. But you do it on the basis of a set of beliefs that most scientists would find completely absurd. The point is that all of our beliefs about the universe are shaped by our presuppositions. Accept a given set of presuppositions, and your worldview follows. That doesn't mean that's actually what's out there. It means that's what you're overlaying onto the world.
Okay. I like. And did you hear the latest about Bigfoot?
What's the latest about Bigfoot?
It's a rumor, but I mean, I haven't had it confirmed, and I have more details on him actually releasing. But I thought it was very interesting that somebody has, and this is not like the last time, but somebody has in their possession some Sasquatch DNA, and that it's being tested for a popular cable television show.
It would not greatly surprise me if there was some kind of large unknown ape in the mountain forest of Western North America. We know that maybe a few million years ago there was a Gigantopithecus all over East Asia with Bering Land Bridge, all that kind of stuff. That wouldn't surprise me at all.
Okay. But he wouldn't be included as part of a list of magical creatures.
No. Any wild animal is magical in a way. If you've ever had a chance to hang out and watch gorillas, they're very enchanting creatures, but not in the same sense as a unicorn or a vampire or some of the things I talked about in Monsters.
My Boston Terrier looks like a gorilla. I sit there and I watch his very expressive face all day long.
I have to say the title Boston Terriers in the Myth doesn't quite do it that well.
Actually, you gave me an idea though. So let's back to the idea about the security of our country. Then, if we are to become eventually then perhaps a nation which is led by those that have provided the security for the elite.
And again, remember that's a temporary stage.
Okay, fine.
And then other people start taking out the security guards and just kind of evolves from there.
Well, that was my next point. And you said the next level is that somebody comes along and takes out those that took out the elite. Where do the international governments come to this who are interested in what resources we do have and or reclaiming what they already own?
A lot depends on whether national governments as such continue to exist. The nation state as we now know it is basically a creation of a modern state history. The idea that there's a government with a territory with specific boundaries, these kinds of governmental functions and so on. It's a very specific, very historically defined way to organize human activities and human presence on the ground. Will that continue as the present age, the industrial age, comes to an end? It's anyone's guess, but my guess is no. We are more likely to see a devolution from nation-states to simply populations. I'm frankly less concerned about the Chinese and more concerned about what happens when Japan, which has about 120 million people and can feed maybe 10% of it on their own ground without petroleum, of which they have none. What happens when the people of Japan start piling onto surplus boats and heading out of the Pacific? Because the major currents run straight to the west coast of North America. I want you to imagine a history of the future in which, say, about 2050, we end up with 30 or 40 million Japanese boat people pouring across the entire west coast of North America. Because that's a real possibility. That's the kind of thing that happens when civilizations go down. I want you to imagine a situation where the current populations of Latin America are basically on the move. If we've got climate change, we've got, there's already massive civil unrest, possibility of governments disintegrating, and of course there are a lot of Hispanic people that have, on the one hand, that have moved into the United States, and on the other hand, a lot of them that remember remember that about a quarter of the United States used to belong to Mexico. And we may have forgotten that, but a lot of them haven't. So, when you start talking about national security, first of all, it's by no means certain, in fact, it's fairly unlikely that the United States will remain a single nation through this process. Again, it's very big, very difficult to manage. And second of all, we're moving into the kind of period, again, the Dark Ages sees what German historians used to call the marvelous term of Völkerwanderung, which means a wandering peoples.
Well, listening to... Go ahead.
When you realize that the people who now live in Hungary, started out about the time the Roman Empire was going in where the Gobi Desert is now. And the people who, the inhabitants of Spain, a lot of them came from what's now Sweden. Again, before Rome fell. Things get mixed up. We could be in situations 1,000 years from now where the people who live in what's now Iowa started out in Brazil. Or Japan. Or, heaven knows where.
But if our resources are so finite and our society starts breaking down, why would anybody want to come here?
Well, the thing is, what if everyone else's is breaking down too? Because we're not just talking about America running out of oil. America reached peak oil production in 1970. We've been on the downslope ever since. Okay, we're talking about a worldwide crisis. There are some places that are perhaps better suited to survive this, to come through in an organized fashion than others, but a very large amount of percentage of the world is faced with the same sort of crisis situation. And if you're starving to death where you are, you could just lay down and die, or you could start moving.
Aren't you making the argument for why we should be drilling in Anwar?
Well, no, because we have a fairly good idea of how much oil is in Anwar, and it's not going to help that much. I'm quite sure we will end up drilling in Anwar, okay? By the time we're finished, we'll have drilling rigs in every national park in this country. They'll be drilling in Yellowstone. Because this country is so greedy for energy and so fixated on this high energy mode of life that I think people will do that. We throw away things that we claim to value rather than make the necessary changes to conserve. I could be wrong, and I'd like to be wrong.
Yeah.
But,
Well, I'm reflecting on what you're saying through an experience I had just before we went on the air. I was listening to an Art Bell interview with Jack Anderson in 1999.
Oh my.
And the portrait they painted of where the United States was heading in just 5 or 6 years was so different than our current reality. It was really, they were way off. And in particular, Jack Anderson was bemoaning the fact that, we don't have public financing for political campaigns, and what a difference it would make if we had it. Well, we got it.
Well, we got a portion of it.
Well, that's fine, but
private money flowing into it.
Of course, but what we did was we created a system where people could opt into it or not, and we saw what happened in the last election. But then he even said, he went into a bit about how the average person doesn't contribute to campaigns and isn't involved anymore, and it's not like the elections of the past. When you look at the turnout for last Tuesday, and it would have been even higher if the Republicans in the numbers they had in past elections. If they had shut up and voted, we would have been around 65% or something.
It would have been very impressive. The problem is that a lot of people try to draw visions of the future that take where we are and try to extract into a straight line. And that's, you're almost guaranteed to end up wrong that way. The models that I'm using are based on what's happened in the past, what happens when societies go through the same kind of changes we're going through now. What happens when they basically overshoot the limits of their resource base and start on the downward slope that comes as a result of that. And it's very predictable. It's very much as though you're looking at a human being at some age, and sooner or later, probably, somewhere in what we'd call old age, the second half of the first century, they're going to die. Now, you may not know exactly how they're going to die, and you certainly don't know when they're going to die, but you know that they're going to die, and you know that if they get to old age, it's likely to have these things are going to happen. They're probably going to need eyeglasses. They may have, their hair's going to turn white. There may be certain other physical changes that normally happen. You can draw the same kind of conclusions by examining civilizations in their rise and fall.
There's always a chance that the patient is going to quit smoking, drop 50 pounds, and become a long-distance runner and live another 20 years.
That's true.
Okay. So that we'll hold that out as a possibility then. But as we're talking about the long descent, John Michael Greer coming up in just a second, I'd love to have you address what disease looks like in the post-industrial age. What epidemics?
Important issue.
Okay. What would be like? We've already seen that we're struggling with certain things when it comes to antibiotics, MRSA. Some of these are the things that are floating out there that seem like a very scary dark cloud over us. So we'll get to that then. The user's guide to the end of the industrial age. What the epidemic situation will be like in the United States without petroleum. Next on Coast to Coast AM. This is Ian Punnett. Free falling, the long descent continues in just a moment. I'm reminded coming up tomorrow night to Coast to Coast AM. We'll have Tracy Twyman back on again, and she's written a little bit about magic as well. Money as Magical. Love that book. Referencing it all the time. But her new book, yikes, she co-wrote it with others, including Commander X and Nick Redfern. And coming up tomorrow night on Coast to Coast AM, we will talk about CIA mind control sex slaves. These are people who live like zombies. People who were unable to think for themselves cohesively because their minds have been intentionally fractured in a secret CIA experiment. Now, allegations have been made like this in the past. Tracy Twyman is trying to present this information in a way which would have some people who had thought this was impossible or just too prurient to even consider to think about. And we'll get to this coming up tomorrow night. The show should establish, at least for you, the possibility that this really did happen and how many people have been victimized and what the true purposes of that victimization was all about. As long as I'm mentioning that, I should probably mention I had a website up for about 6-7 months or so, maybe longer. But it was called prayersofTruth.com, and it has sort of more recently taken on kind of new life. Many more interesting prayers being posted there. Thank you for your contributions. These are prayers of people who are very angry, and the only way that they feel like they can work through that is to name it and to start talking about what it is that's making them angry, whether they're angry at God or whomever. And these prayers are appearing on the website, so you can take a look at prayersofTruth.com as people try to work through the truth of their experience. And one of those I haven't put up yet, but I will.
I know I'd like
about,
to, but
it's about sex, and it's pretty startling. I'll get to that. I'll find it just came in yesterday, and I sat down with it a little bit and was reading through it, and it would be the heaviest of the prayers I think that we would put up on that website. But I'll try to get to that coming up. I think you'd enjoy it. Is the wrong word. I think you'd be challenged by it, changed maybe even by it, and I'll get to that. Prayers of Truth, and I'd like to hear yours too. prayersofTruth.com. As that site continues to get a lot of action, especially around the election season, as people are shaking their fists at the heavens for the people that they voted for that didn't win. Well, some of that is reflected in what's happening on that website too. John Michael Greer, what will happen in our society when the petroleum runs out and the petroleum-based pharmaceutical industry is hit? What happens with antibiotics? What happens with epidemics in our future? John Michael Greer has imagined it following a line of logic. We'll get to that coming up next on Coast to Coast AM with Ian Punnett. So we're talking about John Michael Greer. We're just getting to the thing about epidemics, which is really very scary because, as it is, it seems like we're sort of teetering on the brink of the next epidemic all the time here. And we have, at least we have a pipeline for antibiotics and for other drugs that might be helpful in the case of some major breakout. But if what you're saying is true about the decentralization of power in the United States in the next, say, 50 to 100, 300 years, that's going to be bad news for somebody who is more inclined to get a contagious disease.
Well, it's going to be bad news in one way and good news in another, because one of the reasons that epidemics are such a crisis now is that we have these very quick international nets of travel. Somebody can get sick in Shanghai and start coughing in San Francisco, a couple of hours later, 12 hours later. So we have our system of transportation, which is almost entirely petroleum-based, is a very effective way to maximize the spread of epidemics around the world. So, on the one hand, as that breaks down, we're going to have a much slower process and much more lead time in the course of disease from place to place. As populations contract, and that's also going to happen almost certainly. Again, you don't have the same bacterial pressure, if you will, the amount of organisms that are constantly coming into contact with one another, that are constantly passing to new individuals. Nowadays, it's just dizzy, and it's amazing we're not much sicker than we are. But the thing is, on the one hand, there are these factors. Of course, it's true that there are going to be there's going to be less access to medicine. There's going to be less new medicines being developed, and there's also the real joker in the deck is the decline in public health that's already underway in much of the world. I mentioned earlier that infant mortality in the United States, through quarantine, that we all know. Most people don't realize it's from an Italian word meaning 40 days. And there were areas of Italy where if you were a merchant, you're traveling from someone else, the local city government during the Middle Ages, the Renaissance, would make you wait outside the gates in this little hostel thing for 40 days, being, to see if you were going to come down with a disease before they let you in.
But that's what I mean. To go back to, you're talking about security and how we might be more suspicious of strangers and not offering hospitality, is that if you're right in this vision and society doesn't break larger but break smaller, then you might have the city-state that would prevent anybody else from coming into it, because, I mean, theoretically, people...
Or that would certainly be very watchful and very, very chary of letting people just kind of wander in from anywhere.
Right.
The city-state, on the other hand, I mean, let's imagine we have a city-state somewhere on the West Coast, and there are probably people in that city-state who would give a lot for coffee beans. And there's probably folks coming up the coast who are willing to trade those coffee beans. So you've got, as in the Middle Ages, you've got a basis for trade, but it's going to be carried out in a very careful manner and with a lot of worry about, okay, what diseases is this ship bringing with it? And we need to make them sit, offshore for 40 days to make sure they don't all die of the bubonic plague. That kind of thing.
We need more cats.
Excuse me?
We need more cats to eat more of the rats that were coming off of the ships.
I'm a cat fan anyway, so I think we definitely need more cats. But the thing is, it's less the epidemic diseases that I'm worried about than the endemic diseases. That's the term for diseases that are just in the population ordinarily that are taking their usual toll. These days, very few people die of influenza. 200 years ago, people died of it fairly often.
Sure.
Because, you don't have the antibiotics, you don't have the high-tech medical procedures. If somebody gets a really nasty fever, if somebody gets pneumonia, this is a life-threatening condition. And so this is one of the things that really concerns me, one of the reasons I hope we can see alternative medicine really get up to speed and absorb some of the best elements of today's conventional medicine before conventional medicine goes away completely.
Again, we're talking with John Michael Greer, the author of The Long Descent. Talk about what education would be like as you imagine the future.
Now, again, the education system in this country is broken. We put kids through 12 years of school and they come up as often as not functionally illiterate. And they know...
Well, when you say as often as not, then you're saying 50% of kids are functionally illiterate.
It varies from place to place. We have a fairly good school system in the small Oregon town where I live. On the other hand, when I used to live in a much larger city, and an awful lot of high school graduates were graduating, they were basically unemployable, except, flipping burgers. They had no skills. They had only the most limited literacy, if any at all.
But that's always been true, or has been true for a long time in our industrial centers.
But it's become much more true over the last 30 or 40 years. Again, funding gets cut, and most of the funding heads up to the administration. Standards go away because it's very unpopular to flunk anybody. You get in trouble with parents, and then they don't vote for the school levy. And there are various factors that factors like these affect every civilization in decline. It's not a new thing. But so we've got an educational system that doesn't educate. We have people.
And it strikes me as a gross overstatement. I'm with you to a point, but I speak in schools all the time. I think there are kids who aren't getting a proper education, but
all I can tell you is that when European students come to the United States and go to high school, they have to take all the years over again when they get home, because a European high school graduate usually has a better education than an American with a BA.
Okay, well, that's fine. It's a little bit of ways away from functional illiteracy.
Well, no, but the thing is, there's a huge amount of illiteracy in this country now, and it is an increasing amount. There is also a huge amount of innumeracy. People who have no idea how to handle even the most basic number operations.
Yeah, I think mathematics is definitely something.
And there's a lot of historical and cultural illiteracy. People who simply have no background in the knowledge. When's the last? I don't know. Maybe there are still schools out there that have civics classes, but I know the school district I went to was in the middle of eliminating the last traces of the old civics curriculum. And if that's how you know how the government works, that's how you learn what is the point, what is the structure that governs the political dimension of our lives. What I'm expecting is that process will continue. We will see, I think, the emergence via the homeschooling movement, which I think is a very good thing. We're likely to see the emergence of smaller, community-based sort of post-school, the emergence of a replacement for the current schooling industry, which will be community-based, which will be based on parents who are doing homeschooling or things like that, and simply increasingly work together to provide their kids with a better education. Because again, the current education industry takes in a huge amount of money, and it doesn't actually produce much, and it doesn't produce a very good product. So, it's going to have to become much more community-based, simply because the bureaucracies will not be viable in an age of energy shortages.
But if we're really heading into a different post-industrial age, it seems to me that the whole criteria for what counts as an education should change. People should be taught the life skills that they need to survive in what sounds like a much more Spartan future.
Well, yes, but at the same time, skills like literacy and numeracy don't lose their value just because people have less energy thrown around, or perhaps fewer trinkets. They no longer need storage facilities to keep all the stuff that they bought. These things, all the way through the Dark Ages, after the fall of Rome, monastery schools existed and taught these to anybody who was willing to learn. And it was a very important part in the cultural recovery of Europe after the fall of Rome and everything, that you had these basic skills, these basic cultural skills, these basic elements that allowed people to have access to knowledge. So, yes, I think we need to see more trade schools. If we're going to be able to do anything in this country, we need to rebuild a manufacturing economy of at least some level, rather than the economy of paper pushing and unpayable IOUs that we basically developed for the last 25 years. We need to have more manufacturing economy. We need to have more farmers. We need to have more people who are good with their hands. But that doesn't mean those same people shouldn't know how to read and write, shouldn't know how to reason. There was lesson of logic was taught in the public schools. Shouldn't know how to calculate and do things with numbers. These are not mutually exclusive things. And in fact, 100 years ago, this kind of thing was quite standard. People would go to public schools anywhere in America. They would get, the old 3 R's. They would get some kind, actually, a better education in many ways than kids get nowadays. And then if depending on their prospects in life, depending on a variety of things, many of them would go on to trade schools or would go into apprenticeship programs, would end up with the economic skills they needed to make a good living.
As you see the future in this post-industrial age, what are the roles of men and women?
That is so completely in flux right now, I don't know that I even want to predict it. It's going to be rendered complex, among other things. A lot of what has shaped the relative dynamics of men and women has been the breakdown of a set of old occupational roles. I mean, the old idea that the woman works inside the home and the man works outside the home. Part of that work, part of that functioned the way it did, and it did in some ways function because the household economy was a major economic sector. The households were productive places. There was always a garden. There were clothes being made. There was cloth being spun and woven. There were foods being preserved, canned, and pickled, and dried, and salted, and what have you. There was a lot of work going on that we now have basically farmed out to source. People don't knit, most people don't knit sweaters now. They buy them. Most people don't pickle their own pickles. They buy them. That's going to reverse, and that means there's going to be the reopening up of a household economy. Whether it continues to be divided by, or whether it goes back to being divided by gender as it once was, or whether it mutates in new directions, anyone's yes no.
You say that, and at the same time I'm thinking if part of the problem is if life gets as stark as it might be in the post-industrial age, the division of labor might have to be a much more kind of traditional split. And that might mean this time the guy stays home while the woman leaves and goes out to work. But it would seem like there'd be so much to do to make a household work. One could not depend on conveniences to cut down on time. There'd be a lot more of just a real elbow grease it would take to keep the family looking good or maintaining a minimum standard of health and living.
Well, the ironic thing is that many of our conveniences aren't actually that convenient. I've seen a lot of people get into various to do things that you can take the difference between making bread with making your own bread with a bowl and a mixing bowl and a pan and an oven and a bread machine. The bread machine seems very very simple, very convenient, but you have to clean the thing, which can be complex. You have to pay for the thing, which is quite another matter, and involves putting money into money that is basically your labor, your time that you sell to your employer to get the money to pay for this thing, and until it breaks is another matter. So there are a lot of things that can be done in a much simpler way without actually becoming much more inconvenient. On the other hand, division of labor is a complex thing. There was the stereotype for a long time that men are internationally tough and strong and ready to face the world, and women are shy and retired at home. And I think most of that is nonsense. One of the toughest people I've ever met, a retired Marine sergeant, is female.
Sure. Well, no surprise there.
Yeah, exactly. There are there's a lot, and I know some guys who really badly need to stay at home and be taken care of.
Right. Well, let's just leave that there for the moment. We'll get to your questions and your comments. We'll run the numbers coming up in just a minute for John Michael Greer. And what are you thinking about? What do you imagine the world might be in a post-industrial age? The book is The Long Descent, and we'll get into that coming up tomorrow night too on Coast to Coast AM. The return of Tracy Twyman, and this startling book. It's a title that may be hard to consider. The stories have to be heard, and we'll share it coming up tomorrow night. Mind-controlled CIA sex slaves. Did this program really exist? Who did they target, and why? What was the ultimate goal for these people who were treated like zombies? Coming up tomorrow night on Coast to Coast AM. This is Ian Pine. I don't know if you saw that story. It's very interesting about the opening chord there for Hard Day's Night by the Beatles. It had been sort of a musical / mathematical holy grail. It was a 12-string Rickenbacker that made that opening chord, and I never realized that for years people had been trying to figure out exactly how that was done, exactly what the chord was, what are the exact finger formations, and something that a lot of people have been talking about and blogging about over the weekend, saying it's the most famous chord in rock and roll, that it has been solved with the help of a mathematician, and his name was Jason Brown, and he decided to see if he could apply a mathematical calculation known as the Fourier transform to solve the Beatles' riddle. The process allowed him to decompose the sound into its original frequencies using computer software and parse out which notes were on the record. And it was very interesting. Anyway, they finally solved it. And Hard Day's Night is exactly what our future might be like, a lot more work. That's the opinion of John Michael Greer, The Long Descent. Now, some people still imagine the future at a time when we will have machines to do everything, and that we will experience a decline in our culture because we will just become like big tubs of goo that never move because everything is done for us from a very early age. Not so, says John Michael Greer, a user's guide to the end of the industrial age. And your question coming up next on Coast to Coast AM. This is Ian Punnett. Let's get going right away with questions and comments for John Michael Greer, the author of The Long Descent. It's Douglas in San Francisco to get us started on the wildcard line on Coast to Coast. Douglas?
Hey, always good to talk to you, Mr. Punnett, and thanks so much. It's an honor to have Mr. Greer. I really appreciate his monster book's analysis of the Laotian Churchill phenomenon. And I just wanted to give you a kind of Asian perspective on this and ask how he would kind of try to prosper as a druid in the New Dark Age, because during the Chinese Civil War, it was a war of modernization, and it was a majority countryside versus a minority of cities. But the next U.S. Civil War will be one of post-modernization, and you're going to have a majority of people in the cities putting the countryside under siege. And what happened in China was that when the medical infrastructure was destroyed, they had to rely on barefoot doctors, as Mao called them, or local grassroots kind of herbalists and apothecaries who were trained in folk medicine. And this might be great for a pagan/druid, but in the New Dark Age, if past is prelude, there's politics. We had no such concept of Europe in the last Dark Age. The closest concept we had was Christendom. And when I was in Nicaragua in the 1980s, because Taiwan was supporting the culturists because they recognized the Taiwanese government, they had no communism or capitalism. They simply had feudalism. So we're seeing that come up here, but I'm just wondering, if we have this return to fundamentalism in the medievalist paradigm of the New Dark Age, how would Druidism or the new paganism, wouldn't you be afraid to be persecuted as a heathen within this new wave of darkness?
Well, and that's the thing that you have to understand is that, first of all, fundamentalism as a political force, as a presence in American culture, is very much a modern thing. It's a mistake to compare modern political fundamentalism, because it is a political movement that dresses up in religious drag. And it's important to be aware that it is rather different from the older medieval models of Christianity. Medieval Christianity had its problems, every religion does. And it was, there were a lot of difficulties. But first of all, the sort of fundamentalism we have in America today is a saving force. It is almost entirely these days strong among the elderly. It has its major areas of strength in sections of the rural community. It's much more rural than urban. As you said, we're talking about a majority urban population here.
I want to jump in because what I'm hearing Douglas say, I'm not sure you're tracking with here, because I think you're talking about kind of a sophisticated kind of theosophical sort of fundamentalism, and that's not. I don't think that's what he said. What I'm hearing him say is that when the breakdown happens, people revert to things.
Actually, no. When the breakdown happened, how many people at the time of the breakdown of the Roman Empire went back to worshiping Jupiter? Not many. What typically happens is that people in a declining civilization lose faith in the traditions of that civilization which have failed them, and tend to move on toward whatever the new options are. I actually think that the various pagan religions have a huge future ahead of them in this country.
Well, I'm not disputing that, and I'm not saying it's going to come down to the pagans are going to be persecuted, but back to your point, actually, when Roman society began to break down, actually that's when Christians were persecuted.
Well,
they had to find
Christians were being persecuted when Rome was at its height. By the time Rome was breaking down, Rome was Christian.
I understand that.
Yeah. So
if you actually look at even in the 2nd century, and I don't want to get too technical about this, but I studied this a lot. And when there's waves of breakdown, even after Rome has its first Christian governor, then it still comes back down to there's a sense that competition, that pluralism is a threat. And that's where I think what's so interesting about that is the reaction to fundamentalism is to retreat to the basics. When life gets really complicated, to go back to the simplest form, back when things made sense. And I think that's what I would be worried about in the post-industrial age.
I understand your concern, but historically that's not what happens. When breakdowns happen, people don't go back because they look at what seemed to make sense, but they're not seeing it wow that worked. They're seeing it failing around them. Typically, they're seeing the religion the religion they grew up with as having become a political tool, as indeed fundamentalist Christianity has, where it's simply if another